Okay, let's jump right in. We tend to think that as the world gets more connected, the big goal is to make everything, especially laws, more or less the same. But what if I told you that the very act of trying to make laws the same can actually pull countries further apart? What if it creates brand new, totally unexpected differences? Well, that's the fascinating puzzle we're going to unpack today, all based on the work of legal thinker Gunther Tübner. So, let me just ask you this straight up. If two countries decide to adopt the exact same law, do they automatically become more alike? Now, your gut reaction is probably, well, yeah, of course. But the reality? Oh, it's so much more complicated and honestly, way more interesting than that. You see this all the time with huge projects like the European Union. The whole idea is that if you harmonize the laws, you get convergence. One big happy market, one set of rules. Seems logical, right? But this is where Gunther Tübner's theory just flips that whole idea on its head. He says a new law from the outside doesn't just get a simple yes or no. Instead, it can act like an irritant, forcing the local system to react in ways that actually make it even more unique than it was before. To really get our heads around this, we need to look at two very different ways of thinking about how laws move around the world. It's not just a copy-paste job. It's a dynamic, messy, and pretty incredible interaction. So the traditional way of seeing this is called the legal transplant. It's a pretty straightforward metaphor, right? You take a law that works great in one country, and you just sort of plant it in another, hoping it'll grow just as well. It's a nice, clean idea, but as you can probably guess, it's a little too simple. And this is where things get really cool. The transplant model is just pass or fail. The law either takes root or it withers. But the legal irritant idea is so much more dynamic. The foreign rule isn't just accepted or rejected. Think of it like a grain of sand getting inside an oyster. It's annoying, it's foreign, it doesn't belong, so the oyster is forced to react, to create layer after layer around it until it produces a pearl, something totally new and beautiful that wasn't there before. And the key thing to remember here is that this is an active process. The local legal culture isn't just sitting there passively. It has to grapple with this new rule. It has to try and make sense of it, using its own unique history, its own logic, its own way of doing things. And by doing that, it ends up rebuilding the foreign rule from the ground up. And in the process, it changes itself. Okay, enough with the theory. Let's make this real. We're going to look at the absolute perfect case study, the legal principle of good faith, and the story of what happened when it collided with British law. So, over on the European continent, for centuries, this idea of good faith has been a really big deal in law. It basically means that when you make a deal, you're expected to act honestly and fairly. You can't just stick to the literal words on the paper if it means screwing the other person over. It's a deep-seated, cooperative idea. And the British reaction to this idea? Oh, they hated it. One judge famously called it inherently repugnant. They basically saw it as a contagious disease. Why? Because in their tradition, a contract is like a boxing match. The two parties are adversaries, each one looking out for their own interests and nothing else. This whole let's be cooperative thing was just, well, totally alien. But then, 1994 happened. An EU directive came down and said that every member country, including the UK, had to put the principle of good faith into their consumer contract laws. And just like that, the irritant was injected. The alien idea wasn't just knocking at the door anymore. It was inside the house. The stage was officially set for a culture clash. So what happened next? Did British law just roll over and accept it? Well, to understand the outcome, we have to look way deeper than just the law books. We need to dig into the economic DNA of these places, the hidden forces that really shape how a society works. See, Tübner's big insight here is that the law doesn't exist in a vacuum. The real answer lies in what you could call the operating system of an economy. Economists call them production regimes, but it's basically the fundamental way a country organizes its capitalism. And that environment determines everything about how a legal irritant is going to be handled. And it really breaks down into two main flavors. You've got the continental model, the coordinated market economy. Think of this one as being all about the long game, cooperation, high-trust networks, and negotiation. Then you have the Anglo-American liberal market economy. This one's more like a 100-yard dash. It's all about short-term competition, adversarial relationships, and winning in the market. Let's take a place like Germany, for example. The entire system there is built for stability and long-term relationships. The money is patient, labor relations are cooperative, and companies work together. The whole economy is fundamentally built on trust and playing the long game. Now just flip that completely on its head for the British model. Here, the name of the game is fast money and short-term returns. The markets are more of a free-for-all. Companies are fierce competitors. It's a dynamic but much more adversarial survival of the fittest kind of system.
All right, so the scene is set. We have our irritant, good faith, and we have our two very different host bodies, Germany and Britain. Now for the big reveal, how this one single principle got twisted and reshaped into two completely different things.
And this is just brilliant. The exact same words, good faith, ended up with two totally different jobs. In Germany's cooperative world, it became a rule to encourage teamwork, kind of like saying, hey, let's work together. But in Britain's competitive world, it was reshaped into a rule to constrain power, which is more like saying, hey, don't you dare abuse your position.
So in Germany, the courts used good faith to basically double down on what their economy already does best. It created legal duties to share information, to be loyal, even to renegotiate a contract if things go sideways. It was all about keeping the relationship healthy for the long term.
But in Britain, they used that same principle to solve a completely different problem. It wasn't about building cooperation that wasn't there. It was about putting a leash on raw power. It's being used to protect regular consumers from the potential downsides of a cutthroat market. It became a shield, not a handshake. Okay, let's pull back for a second. What does this one little story about a legal clause tell us about the whole project of globalization and the dream of a unified world? Well, a lot, actually. Tibner has this amazing phrase for it, unitas multiplex, which basically means unity in diversity. He's saying that real, lasting integration doesn't come from trying to steamroll over all our differences. It comes from building a system that actually respects and relies on the fact that we're all different. And that's really the big takeaway here. Pushing for everyone to have the same rules doesn't create some bland, uniform world. Instead, it acts like a pressure cooker. It forces all those deep-seated cultural and economic differences to come bubbling to the surface and express themselves in new and often really surprising ways. The attempt to make us all the same can actually end up proving just how different we really are. So I'll leave you with this thought. In our world that is constantly pushing for more standardization in technology, in business, in culture, where else do we see this irritant effect happening? Where else is the pressure to conform actually creating these fascinating, unexpected, new kinds of diversity? It's a pretty powerful lens to see our interconnected world through.